What is going on, my cinephiles? Your boy just got out of watching The Creator. This is a new film directed by Gareth Edwards and set in the year of 2065. Joshua is a hardened ex-Special Force agent who is grieving the disappearance of his wife and is recruited to hunt down and kill the Creator. When he finds a secret weapon, a robot in the form of a young child who has developed a mysterious weapon with the powers to end the war and mankind itself if it's not destroyed. And setting the stage before I get into my positives, I like Gareth Edwards as a director. I have not seen Monster, but I was not the biggest fan of the 2014 Godzilla film. There wasn't a lot of Godzilla, and there were a lot of characters that I was not the biggest fan of. And then we go into Rogue One, a Star Wars story, which I personally really love. So for me personally, from the two films that I've seen, he has been hit and miss. And the trailer for this film really took me a while for it to grow on me. But as we have come to the final days of this movie being released, I was getting a little bit more excited, mostly because we have been getting some really strong word of mouth for this film. So going into this movie, I was curious to see what Gareth Edwards was going to bring us, and for me personally, I have mixed feelings with this film. Starting off with a couple of things that I really like. The visuals for this movie, whenever you're going into a Gareth Edwards film, you know that the visuals are going to be absolutely fantastic. They are beautiful to look at, and it blends in very well with the cinematography. I think every single shot is absolutely beautiful and stunning to look at, and that is worth a price of admission alone. I really like the interactions that we have between Joshua and the little robot girl. It took a little while for it to grow on me, but as the film progressed and we get to know these two characters and what they're like, the father-daughter dynamic that we have between these two absolutely work, especially when you have Joshua who is tasked to kill this weapon, and once he finds out what it is, he has a hard time really following orders, and it kind of makes him go on a rogue mission. And John David Washington, for me personally, it took me a while for me to get used to his character, because at first it does feel like he is a stubborn person, but he has a lot of layers that I was not expecting this character to have, that I started to buy the character a little bit. And you do get behind the central moral mission. Plus, the story, on the other hand, is also something that is very timely at the moment, with AI being a really big issue, especially when it comes down to Hollywood and basically what the writers were on strike for, because it does feel like AI is kind of the new evolution as to what humanity is going to be. And the way that the story really entwines that message and the way that it's handled, I thought it absolutely worked. What I feel like this movie kind of lacked for me personally was a little bit more of the pacing, because I really like what they were introducing in the first act. The first act, the way that it was set up, you get to know the characters a little bit. It adds a little bit of heart into it. But once we get into the second act and we go on this mission trying to protect this child, the whole film starts to grind down to a halt. And it was hard for me to get into this film. It was just a slow moving sci-fi film, which, you know what, on paper it absolutely should work. And if you are a fan of slow moving sci-fi films, this movie is going to work for you regardless. But if you're someone that really isn't into the slow moving sci-fi phase, then this movie is probably not going to be one for you to check out, because once we get into that second act, there isn't really a lot going on, and it just feels, I'm not sure if it's the editing or the way the story is being told, but it feels like it's jumping to different portions. We have flashbacks, we have things that are being intertwined, that are being edited, and some of the editing in this movie works. In the second act, a lot of it just feels like the pacing is just moving at a really slow pace. And while I like a lot of the interesting things that they were setting up in the first two acts, it started losing my attention once we got into the second act and a little bit into the third act, because there was a lot going on that it just feels like it went in a different direction at times, and it does feel a little bit messy. Plus, you also have a lot of things in this movie that are reminiscent to a lot of different sci-fi films, especially recently. Like, you have a little bit of Ex Machina thrown in here with the child and the way that the child looks. You also have some Robocops that are a little bit more reminiscent of Chappie, and then you also have a little bit of District 9 in there. So you have a lot of those aspects in this movie, And it was hard for me not to get past those aspects and realize that they were taken from other things. While there are creative things in here from time to time, that there were a lot of different sci-fi elements thrown in here that I was not really vibing with. And once we get into that third act, it does feel like it's stretching the story a little bit too long, and it goes for a little bit too long, even though you could have shortened it down a little bit while still having a little bit of that heart and the way that everything interacts together. I thought the way it wrapped up needed a little bit more, and it felt like they were rushing to the finish line instead of taking their time, because the way that this movie is constructed, the way that this movie is felt, there is a lot of lagging that I was not able to get behind. And at times I was able to get behind John David Washington's character, other times it just wasn't working for me. But that little interaction that we have between the two, between the little robot girl and John David Washington's character, I think that is what held the movie together, plus mixed in with a little bit more of the stunning visuals that are beautiful to look at. Hans Zimmer provides the score for this movie, and it feels like a part of the movie. But this is just one of those films where I went in wanting to come out and love it, but overall I just came out really just liking it. I didn't love it as much as I wanted to, and it's mostly due to that pacing in the second act where there's just a lot going on. Plus, I was not really vibing with Allison Janney as the villain of this movie. It just felt like a stereotypical bad guy that we've seen many times before in different sci-fi films. But overall, I'm going to go ahead and give The Creator a 7.5 out of 10. But those are my thoughts on The Creator. Is this one that you're interested in checking out, or is it just one that you're going to wait for it on streaming? Go ahead and drop your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys soon.